Good morning, South Africa. I am so honored to be here today to present a class about controlling your business in a very uncertain environment. And I think all of us can relate to that. My name is Kristan Cole. I am a MAPS coach with Keller Williams, also part of the master faculty. I am an agent and I'm also an operating principal. I have my main hub in Wasilla, Alaska, and I have expansion teams across the U.S. in about 40 different locations. Also an OP, operating principal of 4 market centers in Arizona. So today, I'm really excited that and honestly honored that I was asked to present about a topic that I think all of us are very, very aware of, and that's how do you control your business in an uncertain environment? Well, I would say I want to start off by giving you a quote from Gary Keller. He said, "This year we have had to do business as usual in an unusual way." Boy, isn't that the truth? So how do we do that? What does that look like? Well, here's the one thing that I can say you always start with in any shift, whether the shift is called a pandemic or whether the shift is some other major factor like an economic factor that we had in the U.S. in 2008, or whether it's a shift in your own personal market in your own location. Focus on what you can control. I think oftentimes we're focusing on things that we can't control, and that's kind of a waste of our time. So today I want to talk a lot about focusing on what you can control and really talking about some life-saving tips in this type of environment. So first, I want to just mention, what are the first 2 things that we need to focus on when we find ourselves in a shifting market or a market of uncertainty? Because remember this, there's always going to be chaos somewhere. And the great thing is there's always opportunity in chaos. So fear not. Chaos gives us room for opportunity. It gives us room to show up when nobody else wants to show up. So number 1, in a shifting market, the biggest determinant is you've got to make sure that you're thriving in your lead generation. Remember this, the path is always still the path, meaning we always need to be lead generating. During some shifts, it may mean that we have to double down on that in order to survive. The second thing is that determines our, really how well we do or whether our business even survives through a shift is making sure that we do expense management. That doesn't sound real fun, but it's something that we need to do. You can't build a business by cutting back or cutting expenses, but you can find your profit. And the bottom line is the business has to survive. Your business, whether you're a single agent or whether you're a market center owner, the number one thing is we have to make sure your business will survive. So we've got to cut costs to make sure that happens. We've got to get it to 0 if that's what it takes. So working hard, doubling down on lead generation, those are all things that we need to be painfully aware of. And I'm just going to mention a couple more things. During any sort of a shift, you need, as a leader, whether you're leading yourself, whether you're leading a team of agents, whether you're leading a market center or a region, number 1, as a leader, when a major event happens, no matter what it is, you need to show up immediately. You need to be visible, be fully present, communicate often, and have a proven plan. And you're probably saying, well, Kristan, how can we have a proven plan in an uncertain environment? Well, in any uncertain environment, there are keys to it. It's narrowing your focus on what matters, cutting expenses, and making sure you have the right capacity, meaning the people, and then making sure you execute on a proven plan to double down on your revenue, which means lead generation. So your tone sets, you set the tone for everything when you walk in that door every day, or whether you show up on Zoom every day. We all kind of know what that looks like. So I want you to remember a few things as we get started to talk about these 4 life-saving steps. Number 1, everything is worthwhile. Adversity just makes the hill steeper. So everything worthwhile is uphill, and adversity just makes the hill steeper. Remember that there is always an answer. It may not look like it initially, but trust me, there's always an answer. Feed your faith and starve your fear. Remember that our motion, getting into motion and not becoming paralyzed, actually will influence your emotion. Today matters. Every single day you wake up in an uncertain environment, today matters. So speed is important, doubling down and narrowing your focus on the only things that matter and getting rid of the 80% that just doesn't. Remember, sometimes during a shift and during a uncertainty, the best decision might look like a bad decision, but it's better than a worse decision. Keith Cunningham talked about that in his book, when he was talking about how we need to cut expenses and what we need to do in uncertain environments. Adversity will make you relatable. I promise you that. Adversity does make all of us relatable because we're all in this together. Always look at the big picture. Here's what I do know. Opportunity always starts off looking like a problem. So run to those problems. Run to those problems, look at the big picture, get smack dab in the middle of the problem, and all of a sudden you look up and you start to see opportunity. Cut expenses now. Continue to cut expenses so that the business survives no matter what. Your own personal business, your market center, your region. Double down on lead generation that matters and communicate often. Communicate often. So now let's dive into, well, what are those 4 life-saving steps in first aid? You know, when you think about first aid, you've got to stop the bleeding, start the breathing, protect the wound, and treat the shock. So today we're going to talk about that. Stop the bleeding, that means we've got to cut expenses. And we have to look at those not just once. Look at them more than we've ever looked at them and ask yourself some questions. And we're going to talk about that. You've got to start the breathing, which means lead generation. It means doubling down on lead generation. The message may be different, but our path is always still the path. And that means lead generation. So the message might be different to your buyers and sellers. The mode of which you deliver it might be a little different, but the path is always the path. We have to protect the wound, and we're going to talk about that today, which means taking care of our team, taking care of our buyers and sellers, taking care of our clients, and taking care of our community. And then treat for shock. So, what questions should you ask around cost cutting? We're going to look at that. We're going to look at revenue, and we're going to look at some shift tactics from the book Shift that will help you figure out what is the message of the moment during this particular shift. And then have an open dialogue around, where are the wounds? How can we help people? What does that look like? What does that look like today? So let's start by stopping the bleeding. So in Shift Tactics 1, 2, and 3 from the book Shift by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan, Gary talks about holding our expenses accountable. Well, what does that really mean? And we need to cut costs. Well, what does that look like? It means looking at your expenses in a different way than you have before. It also means that you may need other people sitting down looking at your expenses with you, because we have to get real and we have to get right. It also means that any spending has to move the business forward. And if it doesn't, then we need to cut it, because the business must survive. So let's look at what this looks like. So how does having this, so when you look at your expenses, I want you to be able to ask yourself these 4 questions. How does this, every single line item, every single thing in your budget, and if you don't have a budget, then pull out your checkbook, pull up your banking online. We sat down as a group and we went through not only every expense in our bank account, but then we pulled out the credit card statements and we went through line by line by line, and we ask ourselves these questions. How specifically does having this expense bring me a return on investment? Meaning, do I really need this? Do I absolutely have to have this in my business in order for me to do business? I can think of some things we must have. We must have technology right now in order to communicate with folks that don't feel comfortable communicating in person. That means we need Zoom and Facebook Live and things like that. So those pieces of technology and actually the software to run it, I would say is a need, not a want. And you can always bring in people to help you look through these sorts of things to ask yourself these questions. Number 3, can I do this and have this differently in a way that reduces my costs or gets it to zero? Meaning, is there some way for you to take a cost that typically you've been paying for and get it to zero? What would that look like? Here's what I can tell you. Write this down. Most people ask themselves the question, can we get this expense to zero? Mark that out. In front of it, I want you to put the word how. When you put the word how in front of how can we, your mind start thinking of ways that you could make it happen. So I want you to think, how can we get this cost to zero? Because there's profit in the pennies, my friends. There's profit in the pennies. So how can we get our bad debt to zero? How can we eliminate bank charges or credit card charges from, how can we reduce our lease space or our copier costs? How can we? Because the business must survive. If the business doesn't survive, where are the agents going to come to work? If your business doesn't survive, how are you going to feed your family? We have found so many ways to cut costs. We actually started this before the pandemic, and we challenged ourselves every month to look for a 1% reduction in expenses. If you can reduce your costs by 1 to 2% a month, at the end of 12 months, you've reduced your costs 12 to 24%. And when you do it like that, it's not nearly as hard as waking up and having to overnight cut your expenses by 24%. You need to look at your systems. Do you have the right systems in place right now to support your business? Gary Keller says that we've taken what would have been 5 years to really absorb and embrace some of this technology, and we've done it in 5 months. Well, now we've done it in almost a year. So do we have the right systems in place and the right technology? And are we fluent in command? And are we using KW resources in order to help our businesses grow, rather than using expenses by an outside company that we don't control? Do you have the right people in the right seats on the right bus? Meaning, do you have the right capacity, or do you have an overcapacity? Because, my friends, again, the profit is in the pennies. Do you need to cut things that just don't matter right now? See, when you go into a shift, you go from being strategic to very tactical. That means very, very granular, boots on the ground. What do we have to do to save the patient? And yes, some of us now, having gone through that now for 8 or 9 months, are finding ways to now go back to some strategic growth. But when you're first finding yourself in an uncertain environment, there's nothing more important than holding your expenses accountable, cutting those costs, looking at your systems. Do you have the right systems right now to deliver your service to your clients the way they want to receive it? That might mean via Zoom. That might mean in person. But we have to have all of the tools in place for us to deliver it the way they want it delivered. So what I'd like for you to do is to type in, just if you have a response from whatever piece of software you're using, because they will retype these into the chat box for me. Type into the chat box everything that we've been discussing here. And I'm asking yourself, which expenses are you going to hold accountable? Which one can you think of right now that you could cut tomorrow? So go ahead and type that in the chat box, and I'll just bring up some expenses that you might want to think about. Office space, your monthly TV or cable bill. Maybe you've had a desk phone for years and you don't really need that anymore. Your cell phone will suffice. Maybe you can rebid your insurance, call your carrier for your cell phone and get a lower price for your monthly fee. I can tell you that those folks are working they're bending over backwards to help all of us reduce our costs so that our businesses survive. Maybe it's that you're not going to mail postcards out. Maybe you have been. Maybe you're just going to be calling and checking on people to make sure they're okay. And you're going to be doubling down on being fully present in the relationships that you have with your people. Maybe that's going to be your doubling down on lead generation instead of maybe a product that you were paying for and sending out, or paying for services that you don't have to have right now because you are what the client needs. So I don't know if we've had any questions, but what I'd really love to see is, what are you going to cut now? What expenses can you hold accountable that maybe you've been hanging on to and it's time to cut them? What could you cut tomorrow that would make a difference for your future? How could you set up a system where you have people that will sit down with you on a regular basis and review your income and expenses? If you didn't type it in whatever chat box you might have, what I'd say is jot down some ideas that you have. Come back to this because this is the very first thing, is to stop the bleeding. And that means expenses. Once we stop the bleeding, we need to start the breathing. Any good first aid will tell you that. Stop the bleeding, now start the breathing. What does that mean? That means we've got to find revenue because we can cut our expenses to find our profit. But in order to grow, we've got to find our revenue. We've got to find our doubling down on lead generation. So for agent productivity, the question is, where's the new market of the moment that you can take advantage of? Where's the new market of the moment you can take advantage of? In the U.S., we have a heavily seller's market. You may have a heavily buyer's market. What would the message look like to reach those people in the market that you have? Every market's super hyper local, and there's always segmentation in that market, meaning you might have a buyer's market in one price range and a seller's market in another. So finding those messages and market of the moment, and for agents, with needs, how can you help them? How can you help them with their businesses by what you're learning today? Agents, how can you help others with maybe they have a restaurant, or maybe they have a bar or some sort of hotel hospitality that they need your help with. I remember when the pandemic first happened and we were sheltering in Alaska, and I called my insurance agent and asked him, how can I help you with your budget? How can I help you cut your costs so that your business survives? This is where we get to show up big time with our family, with our friends, with our communities, and show them that we truly care. And this comes from Shift Tactics 4, 5, and 6. I guess what I'm really saying is, are you willing to get up today and do what no one else wants to do, and do it daily so you can be the hero? And what I would say is, you will have the best of both worlds by doing it. You'll be able to capture market and capture hearts. So let's continue to look at starting the breathing, meaning creating revenue for your market centers, creating revenue for you as an agent, for your team members, for your buyers and sellers, for them to be able to continue, because you know what? Everybody needs housing. It is essential. We have to have housing. So where is the market? We've got to figure out where money is exchanging hands and put yourself smack dab in the middle of it. Where are people buying and selling right now that you need to put yourself, your market center, your agents right there smack in the middle of that opportunity with buyers and sellers? How can you communicate with them in such a way, like Gary says, business as usual in an unusual way? That's really the magic, because the path is always still the path. And are you willing to do what no one else is willing to do? And be the best at it in the world when you're doing it. This is your opportunity. Gary Keller says that anytime we have a shifting market, it's a way for you to take more territory. Taking more territory as an agent, taking more territory as a market center owner, taking more territory as a region, increasing your market share in your location. This is a massive opportunity. Some will, some won't. And For most of you, I know you will, because you would not be taking this education and continuing to learn if you weren't a doer, if you weren't a leader. So keeping keeping expenses low and revenues high is what is going to allow keeping expenses low will allow your business to survive. Getting your revenues high by taking territory is going to allow you to come out of this stronger than you've ever been. Territory given up during a shift is rarely ever taken back. And territory gained during a shift is rarely ever given up again. So go take territory. Double down. Remember, everyone has to have a place to live. Everyone needs food, everyone needs medical care, and everyone needs housing. So let's look at the housing market. I think most people forget that the housing market really is lateral, left to right. It's moving all the time, and it's shifting from either a normal market to a not normal market. And when you look at this graph, there's never been a flat market. There's always activity, just not the same activity. Sometimes it's a buyer's market, sometimes it's a seller's market. So I want you to ask yourself this question. Who are the sellers right now that need to sell? Because maybe they lost their job. Maybe they've been furloughed. Maybe they had to shut their business down. So be thinking about who are the sellers that need to sell. Maybe they have a second home that they can't get to right now because of the pandemic. And yet, so they're not able to take advantage of that asset. Maybe they'd like to sell that asset and put the money to the sidelines to invest later. Remember, they need you. So we have to be creative and think, what is the opportunity in the middle of this pandemic that we can take advantage of in a very uncertain environment? Well, we do know there's been a lot of people furloughed. We do know there's people that have lost their jobs. We know there's people that have second homes that aren't able to use them. We know that there were sellers who maybe wanted to sell but took their house off the market because of the pandemic. And so you could be calling them and finding, is there a safe way for us to put your home on the market and sell it for you now? So I want you to really put your brain in overdrive, like who are the sellers now that you should be reaching out to? We call that the 5 shadow sellers. And also, because we have such a heavy sellers market in the U.S., we're heavily promoting the message. There are 7 reasons that you should consider having your house in the market right now. So that gets them to call us, and we can share with them what those are and help them decide, is this the right time for them or not? Maybe you're in a buyer's market. So regardless of the market you're in, remember that there's always a gap between what buyers are thinking and sellers are thinking, and it's up to us to bridge that gap for them, to help them understand the market, to understand the segmentation in the market so that they can move forward and take good care of their family and do what's right for their family in a very uncertain and changing market. So I want you to take out a sheet of paper right now. And I want you, because I'm going to want you to write some things down. I want you to write a sheet of paper, and I want you to put on the left side buyers and on the right side sellers. And just like we just discussed, we've got to find the revenue in any market, whether it's a appreciating market, a changing market, a down market, because our market is going to be shifting. It's just a matter of when. And I want yourself to, here's the question. Where is money changing hands? Where is money changing hands? And put yourself in the middle of it. The market doesn't just go up, but it actually goes left to right, from a buyer's market to a seller's market to a normal market. And you have to ask yourself, why are they motivated right now? So who are the buyers right now? Where do they currently live? How do you find them? Same with sellers. Again, in the U.S., we have a flight right now, a flight out of super urban areas to suburban areas. We have a flight from the West Coast and the East Coast to the South, where there's tends to be more room and the average sales price is lower. So asking yourself the question, where is the buyer going to be coming from? Where's the buyer right now? Where do they currently live? How do we find them? How do we come up with a message that's going to resonate with them to raise their hand and call us? How can we be calling our customers and our clients and asking them what we can do to help them right now. Sellers as well. Who are they? Where do they currently live? I bet there's a lot of people right now that would love to have a bigger house with an office and with a family room for kids to play and in a school room. So in the U.S., we have a lot of our schools are shut down and kids are homeschooling. So that puts added pressure with everyone at home. That kind of hasn't ever happened. So being creative and asking yourself these questions will help you find, where can I put myself smack dab in the middle of what's going on so that I can take advantage of the opportunities and help my clients buy and sell property. So just take a minute and write down your answers to where can you find buyers. Now that we've kind of talked through that, gosh, they might be selling in one area and wanting to move to another area for all their reasons. Maybe they want to sell and rent for a while and put their money to the sideline because maybe they're getting ready to retire. Or maybe they have been furloughed and now they might be facing foreclosure. How could you reach out to them in a genuine way and help them with their needs? When you ask, how can I help? Your mind goes into overdrive to find those creative ways for you to get smack dab in the middle of opportunity. Now let's look at step 3. Remember, there's 4 steps in first aid. Stop the bleeding, start the breathing. Now protect the wounds. So what do your agents need the most right now? What do you need the most right now? What does your market center need the most right now? What do your people need the most right now? What do your clients need the most right now? And what are you doing to provide that? What do your eye care calls sound like right now? What are you coming from genuine authenticity in order to help people? What does that look like? Can you be the hero? Gary Keller says we can. We can be the hero right now. Just like we have the frontline heroes, our healthcare workers, the frontline heroes, you can be the heroes of your clients by sharing with them exactly what's going on in the market and helping them make big financial decisions to help their family. You can be that hero. So what do you need? What do your clients need? What do your market center agents need? And what are you doing to provide that right now? This is a massive opportunity for you to be the hero. So step 4 in first aid, in controlling your business in an uncertain environment, well, the step 4 in first aid might be treating for shock, right? You stop the bleeding, you've started them breathing, right? And you've protected the wounds, meaning you've come along with care and candor. But now, how do we treat for shock? We know that this runs deep in our world right now, whether you're in South Africa, whether you're in the UK, or whether you're in the United States. This is affecting people to the core. We know that. We know that there is double amount of emotional and behavioral issues right now in the home because we're doing something we've never done before. Yesterday is gone. And initially, when this happened, we all wanted to get back to normal. What we know now is we have to get used to, I call it the new now. Some people call it the new normal. But how can we help people adjust? You know, change is inevitable, but us participating is optional. We don't have to participate, but I can tell you this. There is no opportunity when things are perfect and there's no change. So don't get angry at the changes we've had to make because there's always opportunity in change as well. Remember, change is inevitable, but our participation is optional. Are you going to participate? Are you going to find your new now? What are you going to lean into to choose the new normal? What's that going to look like? What's that going to look like? Well, let's talk about some of the things, next steps for you. Cutting costs and holding them accountable for a return. Building your reserves and getting a budget to match your reserves. That means you've got to double down on lead generation. That means you have to double down on doing what you have to get up and do what nobody else wants to do and do it daily. That's the difference between wildly average and wildly successful. Can you get up every day and do what no one else wants to do? That's where the opportunity is, my friends. Ask yourself, where is money exchanging hands? And how will you put yourself, or if you're a market center owner, your agents in the middle of it? How do you help them get in the middle of money exchanging hands? What do your agents and what do you as a market center leader need to survive and thrive? What do you as an agent need for your family to not just survive, but thrive and come out the other side? And how will you protect their wounds? How will you come along with empathy during a very difficult time and caring for those who still have not gone back to work? What is going to be your new now, your new normal? And what will you do to help your agents move from here to there quickly? It's got to be something that we do quickly. You know, I love what Gary Keller says. There's always a gift in the shift. There's always gifts in the shift. Whenever there's market share being gained and lost, there is always a gift in the shift. And you know, sometimes I know people feel like a phone weighs 50 pounds. Well, right now it should actually only weigh about 5 ounces, because right now everyone can succeed in the shift. Some will, some won't. So everyone won't necessarily succeed. Some will, and anyone can. Because growth comes from clarity of your priorities and focused action. So with everything you're learning here today, what focused action can you take? Well, number one, you could read the shift book and refamiliarize yourself with the tactics during any shift, the truths that work in any shift. You can do what nobody else wants to do, and you can be the best in the world at it. You can build your business by cutting expenses and finding your profit and staying out in front. You can decide to lead generate and double down on what you know to do that nobody else wants to do. You can remargin your business by cutting expenses and doubling your lead generation. Those are all things that we can do. See, in an uncertain environment, we have to look at what we can control and what we can't control. We can control our actions. We can control our attitude. We can control our mindset. We can control what we do every day. We can control our calendar. We can control our schedule. There's so much that we can control, and by doing so allows us to succeed at such a high level. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do with what you've learned here at the family reunion in South Africa? What would that look like for you and your family if you were to narrow your focus and ask yourself, how can I take action today? How can I refocus my business and double down on my lead generation? How can I reduce my costs and my expenses on things that I have just taken for granted as a necessary cost that maybe need to be revisited so you can find your profit by cutting some of your expenses? What would that look like for you? What's next for you? What other opportunities are there out there? There's a lot of opportunities out there. Every shift brings opportunity. Gary says there's more opportunity in it when we have a shift than there is in a normal market. How are you going to take advantage of those? I'm going to leave you with a couple more thoughts that I think are important in a shift. And for most of us, this shift is going to be a defining moment in our life. So I ask yourself, how are you doing so far? How are you? You know, we've all been through shifts before. If you've been in this business more than 10 years, you've been in a shift at some point. And I'm going to give you the 5 things that I know real quickly that if you deploy them quickly, these are the things I've learned that matter in any shift. Speed matters. getting the ship righted fast, meaning as fast as you can, you have to be faster than everyone else. It's impossible to have all the information that you wish you had so you could make decisions. John Maxwell says you only need to know about 75% in order to make a decision. And honestly, during a shift, there's no time. It's triage mode. So you've got to make things happen. You've got to move quickly. Speed does matter. Cutting expenses matters. We've talked so much about that in the last 40 minutes. Most variable expenses need to be immediately cut or put on hold. And unless you can track and define a return on investment, cut it. Fixed expenses too. Maybe your lease needs to be abated or renegotiated. Maybe your credit card's frozen. Right now, remember, everything's on the table to make sure your business, your family survives. Number 3, I can't overemphasize how much communication matters. Communication to your buyers and sellers, communication to your family, and if you're a market center owner, communication to your leadership team and your agents. So especially if you have a lot of employees, they need the honest truth about where things stand. The first day that we were sheltering in, I went live to all of my employees and let them know exactly where things stand and to not worry that I have their back and we will get through this. I've been through many shifts and they can count on me as their leader. And that means you have to make a decision and you have to make decisions quickly. And what I shared with them is, I have a proven plan. I've been here before, my friends. You can trust me. Remember that cash matters. You're not going to have as much of it as you wish you did, so you have to be very careful with where you place it. You have to pull in as much revenue as fast as you can because you're always going to need it. Investments matter. When you've secured your business and it's secure and you know it will survive, it's time to go on the offense. Because one of the great things, that has happened in the shift is there's a lot of talent that's available for hire because they've been furloughed. So secure talent, bring them into your world. Maybe it's your first hire, maybe it's your 20th hire. But build your tribe, my friends. Build your community, reach out to your customers, show people how much you care. It's all too easy to hide sometimes and just want to stick your head in the sand, let the storm blow over. We all know that that's not going to happen. And we also know that the pandemic isn't over yet. And we also know that until the vaccination is worldwide, the pandemic or the shift, we will still be shifting because the pandemic will still be here. It's a virus. We know that. So I love this quote from Elizabeth Edwards. She stood in the storm, and when the wind did not blow her away, she adjusted her sails. So my friends, adjust your sails. The wind may get stronger, and you're going to need all hands on deck. So we have a few minutes left. If any of you would like to ask me any questions whatsoever, it'd be my honor, my pleasure to answer them for you. So with the software or if you're on Facebook Live or whatever you're using, if you will type in your questions, there is a little bit of a delay. So it may take a few minutes for those questions to come in, or a few seconds, I should say, and then for them to retype them in the chat box here for me. But I'm more than happy to take your questions. I have been in real estate for 36 years now. Actually went to college and double majored in real estate and finance. And then I have been through 3 or 4 major shifts during my 36-year career. And what I've taught you today, what I've shared with you today, what Gary Keller has written a book called Shift About, are things that you can immediately, it's your go-to book when all of a sudden someone moves your cheese, if you've ever read that book. You wake up and the world has changed. And you've got to pivot and pivot quickly. That book is your go-to book. I've shared with you as many things as I can think of that will help you during a shift. Remember, you are the leader of you. You're the leader of your family, your friends, your clients, your community, and maybe you own a market center and you're the leader in the market center. So show up, be available, be visible, and have a proven plan. This, my friends, is a proven plan. The Shift book, my friends, is a proven plan. So if there's any questions that I can be helpful with, I'm happy to answer them. Don't know if we've had any come in or not, but we have a few minutes left, and I'm happy to answer them if they have. Do we know if any questions have come in? Not yet. Just says very informational session. Thanks, Kristan. Where I learned a lot of this, I've had the opportunity and honor of being part of Gary Keller's top 100 group or his platinum group. And typically, Gary Keller will meet with us twice a year. And during the shift, during the pandemic, he met with us every single month. And he brought on, really a lot of other leaders like Keith Cunningham and other leaders to help us get through this and help us to learn what we needed to do right away. And so the other thing that you can do is surround yourself with folks who've been through this before and can help you and mentor you through anything like this. So my friends, thank you so much for allowing me, Alaska girl, to be here with you in South Africa. I wish you just the rest of today to have a fabulous family reunion, and that you take these notes and you go put them into action, because the difference between wildly successful and wildly average is for you to get up and do what nobody else wants to do, and do it daily, my friends. Thank you so much for having me. It was my honor to be here. Thank you, South Africa.